welcome to the latest segment of Moments Off the Mat. I'm Tony Black, USA Wrestling's Director of State Services. I'm here today with Tuttle, Oklahoma High School head wrestling coach Matt Surber. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it. Great to jump on, Tony.
Yeah, great. So first question that I got to ask any wrestling coach, anyone who considers themselves to be a wrestler, how did you get your start wrestling?
Okay, so I've got a short version, I've got a long version. I'm gonna give you a long version. And I love to tell this story. I've told it quite often, various versions of it to my guys. I've been the head wrestling coach here in Tuttle now for 14 years, and before there I was assistant coach. So I started wrestling technically in the 6th grade. My PE teacher, who is also the wrestling coach by the name of John Finn, I don't know if you know John, but he was involved with our freestyle wrestling for a long time. So my 6th grade year, he asked about coming to wrestling camp. Well, I didn't know anything about wrestling. When I say anything, like zero, never been to a duel. All I knew about wrestling was maybe WWE, because they'd had a local deal there before. So John invited, encouraged me to go to wrestling camp. I remember for some reason out on the either PE or recess in the 6th grade, like working on double legs or like learning how to do double legs somehow. And that's just a vague memory. Anyway, I remember going home, talking to my grandma. I always went there after school. My mother picked me up after work, and my older cousin was a 7th grader. And he hadn't wrestled. And so it was like, we're going to watch this movie. And, it's back then you had to go down to the, cause I talked to my grandma and I said, well, coach had talked about, there's a movie called Vision Quest. You'll watch it over the weekend. It'll tell you what wrestling is. I mean, a true story. So we go down to the local video place, get the VHS tape and watch Vision Quest. And I'm like, yeah, I can do this, put on sweats, work out, so forth. But, anyway, I go out for wrestling or I go to the camp, get inspired to wrestle. The next year, Coach Finn moved to Westmore. He started that program in 1988. Westmore High School, which is a large 6A school, probably about 25 minutes from my current job here where I live in Tuttle. So I credit a lot of it to Coach Finn asking me to wrestle back then. And the reason I've told this story so often is because I recruit our local 7th graders hot and heavy. A lot of them that naturally play basketball, I don't mess with. I understand they grew up playing basketball, but every kid's a basketball player if you ask them, because they got a goal either hanging on their garage or they got a goal in their driveway. And so once they get cut from basketball or they figure out that, they're really not going to be good enough to beat their buddies that are playing basketball, we get them in the wrestling room, and our retention rate has been out of the roof with those guys. I think we do a great job coaching them up, and I can tell the parents, hey, I didn't know anything about wrestling either, but it's a great sport. It's different than baseball and softball and football. They're more mainstream. And, so it's a great story that I like to use to get guys out for wrestling. And Coach Finn, he was a big guy, loud, had a lot of respect for him. Still talk to him. Actually, his oldest son, Russ, was our assistant wrestling coach from 2010 to 2014. And we're just recently going to rehire him back to come back and coach our heavyweights. All his guys were big. They were big heavyweights. Dustin wrestled in college, so did Chris. I think all of them wrestled, either played football or wrestled in college. So big influence goes to him for getting me out. So that's why, as I started my journey a long time ago coaching wrestling, I've never been bashful about asking a kid or their parents to give the sport a try.
That's awesome. So many people get, grabbed out of the hallway. A coach, a teacher is like, hey, have you given this wrestling any look? But I think it's really funny that Vision Quest also helped inspire you to get on the mat.
Hey, I remember I was nervous, apprehensive. Like, I don't know what wrestling is, and you want to know you want to kind of have an idea of what you're getting into. And I'll never forget, we drove down to the local store where you rented movies, and we rented Vision Quest, just so we knew what actual amateur wrestling was like. So, and even to this day at the high school, I'm constantly fielding questions with our teachers, encouraging them to come watch. Or we've got a big following, and they're always like, well, the other day, that wrestling match, Ryder Ramsey, he looked like he was just playing cat and mouse with that guy. What was going on? I'm like, well, he was taking him down, letting him up, trying to get us bonus points, 8 points more. So, I love talking that stuff, love telling stories. And I really feel like, wrestling is hard to follow if you don't know the rules, because everybody knows football. Everybody knows basketball. And, but, I also tell our parents every year at our banquet, and I tell our parents, talk to other parents, wrestling will teach you more about yourself and do more for you as an individual than any other sport, in my opinion, for a lot of reasons. The combative nature of it, the sacrifices, the hard work. Hard work's not even a deal for us. I think our guys here in Tuttle, we wear that as a badge of honor. And so they're proud to know they're going to get into something that's hard and meaningful, and they're going to work at it.
Yeah, that's great. They appreciate the struggle. I know my brother and I wrestled for 18 years. My grandma came to, countless matches. And what I would say is when we stopped wrestling, she still had no idea any of the nuances. And she would always ask my dad, what am I supposed to do? And my dad would just simply tell her, cheer when we cheer. That's it. So, right, if you don't have time to sit down and explain it, certainly there's a lot. How many different ways can you score 1 point when you think about that? How many different ways can you score 2 points, right? It's different than 6 points for a touchdown, 1 point for an extra point. So,
and it's if you just follow it, and we always do a deal at the first of the season, try to let them know, hey, we're in a neutral position. When you take your opponent down, have control, it's 2 points. And I think that gets lost in the shuffle too. I mean, as they come and watch, they start figuring things out. But they'll always ask me, when I say they, I'm referring to teachers or people I run into, like, what were you on that referee for about that one? It's because they're oblivious to what really is going on. And now, and then our faithful parents and stuff, they tend to think they know all the rules. And so I always have to sometimes quiet them a little bit, because they'll be on referees hard in their own little gym about stalling, or if they missed a takedown or a near fall swipe. And so it's funny. I really enjoy it, though. I love explaining wrestling and try to teach people so they can follow the sport more. But, the hardest part, and it's difficult, is the kids that come from no wrestling background. I mean, it's just been my experience. If they don't have the coach is the only factor, if there's nobody within their family to get them out and then share that knowledge. And so I always tell all my parents that have been around, you find the younger parents and coach them up. I used to try to tell younger parents, hey, go find the older parents. And they're apprehensive to even ask. So now I put the responsibility on our parents that have been around or kids have wrestled. Go buddy up with them and explain to them, because it's like me and you talking. You're going to ask more maybe in-depth questions than if we're addressing you in a whole group and things. And so I think that, and they build connections that way. The wrestling family, when I say the wrestling family, it's our alumni, our parents, all those have wrestled and involved in putting on tournaments and so forth. That becomes one big group, and it's really been healthy for our wrestling program for sure.
Yeah, great. So next question for you, Matt. So you grew up in Chickasha, wrestled there, graduated high school. You went to Central Oklahoma, where you wrestled in college. D2 runner-up, 1997. For David James was the head coach. Obviously, many of your college teammates have gone on to coaching careers. I think it's really interesting. One name that comes to mind down in Allen, Texas, is Jerry Best. When you were in college with your teammates, did you know you were going to coach? And were you comparing ideas then? Hey, when I coach, I'm going to do this. And do you compare notes now that you are all coaches and during the off season, if you're not competing against each other or what was that journey for you, and what does that journey still look like?
Great question. So I was very fortunate. Actually, out of high school, I went to Southern Illinois for 1 year. Larry Christoph recruited me. My son this past summer wrestled his grandson in the duels or at Fargo. So that was rather unique. And there was, so I went to Southern Illinois and was there for 1 year. And then I came back and wrestled for David James for 5 years. Actually, I was wrestled there for 4. And then 1 year I was a grad assistant. So 6 years in college, all in wrestling. And it was crazy. I had not planned on going to college to wrestle. I won a state championship my senior year. It opened up the door to go wrestle at Southern Illinois in Edwardsville. I had an outstanding season. I made the team as a freshman. And that's when my wrestling really took off. I mean, I had a great senior season, and I attribute a whole lot of that to a guy named Chad Randall, who's now the head coach at Chickasha. He's been a head coach in Chickasha for probably going on 30 years. Well, I was fortunate. My senior year, he came in as a lay coach, finishing up his education degree, and wrestled with me and my best friend at the time, Jared Nelson, every day. And I remember walking out of the wrestling room so tired every day, because those that have wrestled, when you wrestle somebody better, they can just wear you out like I've never been that tired in my life. And so now I sympathize when I wrestle with younger guys and stuff. I can just pull them around and they just get so fatigued. So that really set me on this path to where I was hungry for learning more wrestling. Got to Southern Illinois, made the team, then went to UCO. And those years were some of the best years of my life. Most people tell you your college years are some of your best years of your life. And so even in college, I never really thought about coaching. Before I went to Southern Illinois, I was going to go to Oklahoma State and become a veterinarian. I graduated top 10% of my class. School come fairly easy to me, and I'm responsible. So as I get to college, and then I get to UCO, win a national title was my number one focus. And so quickly schooling became secondary to me. And not that I slacked off. I still graduated like a 3.4 GPA, but I was not going to push myself in the classroom. I was going to focus on winning a national title. And so I still really didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought about going into physical therapy. And then I quickly found out I didn't know the language of that. I had a friend whose wife at the time was going through physical therapy, and I was worried about getting into it. And I looked around, and everybody at UCO, for the most part, was going into the education program, and started looking at all the coaches in our state that had graduated from what used to be Central State University, and it was a teaching college, from Benny Coleman, who was an icon in the state at that time, Todd Stidley. I mean, the list goes on and on of some of the greatest coaches in Oklahoma high school wrestling that had graduated from Central Oklahoma. So coincided that with getting married, and my wife was like, because I was going to stick around and be a GA for another year. And my wife's like, no, that's not going to happen. So I took my 18 hours of education classes my senior year, did my student teaching, which one thing there's a couple of crazy things. So one, my student teaching happened the year we had the big May 3rd tornado and about demolished part of Midwest City. Well, I was doing my student teaching over at Carl Albert. Jerry Best was the head high school coach there, so it worked out good. He just graduated a couple years before. I was with a really smart football coach who was also really organized, so I got to learn a lot from him. But anyway, the last 2 or 3 weeks of school, kind of like we're going through with this pandemic, but on a much smaller scale, I didn't have to finish out the last 3 weeks of my student teaching. So it was like, oh, that's all I'm going to college for right now. So I had to write like 1 or 2 journal articles every week, and that was it. So that's a funny story there. But once it came down to it, I realized there was a lot of wrestling I didn't know, and really from the mental side of it. Like I felt like I was so mentally unprepared to wrestle. I suffered a little bit from performance anxiety issues, maybe getting nervous. I'm one of those that naturally overwork. And so I think I dwell on stuff. And so a lot of those things were still in my mind. What probably the number one factor that sent me into coaching was probably the influences of my coaches and teammates in college. I was a runner-up in 1997, got beat of all things in overtime. It was like 3-3. I was wrestling a really good wrestler, kid named Greg Jackson from San Francisco State, who transferred there like the year before from Ohio State. So he was a D1 type kid, and we met in the finals, and I made a mistake. I had a really good low level, but also had a good misdirection. My misdirection low single, I didn't set it up very good. He spun around me in overtime, match over. So really heartbreaking. Next year, had a really good year, didn't end up placing as well, fell short. My graduate assistant year, we had 2 national champions. One of them was Edwin Lauren, who I worked out with all the time. And I found it really rewarding just working out with him and seeing him win and help tell him my struggles and help him on the mental side of it. And, next thing I know, I was getting some opportunities to coach wrestling in Oklahoma from some of the Steve Dunlap sent me basically a packet. It was in a big manila envelope. Fill this out. I mean, a lot of it was already done for me, and called me on landline phone, said, hey, all you gotta do is turn this in. We'll get you hired at Broken Arrow. And Broken Arrow at that time was really, really good. He wanted me to be the head junior high wrestling coach. And got to looking around, ended up taking a job in North Texas in Carrollton, right out of college. They paid more, like about $12,000 more, just to really about from Chickasha, Oklahoma, where it was my hometown, to Tulsa was 2 hours, to North Dallas was almost 3 hours, and we were going to make a lot more money. I'd recently got married. My wife got a good job, so we went down there and started my career as head wrestling coach. When you talk about influences or bouncing ideas, I didn't so much in college, not at all. But as soon as I got a head coaching job, it become, now what am I going to do? I don't even know what I want my rules to be, how I'm going to structure practice. Like, it's a million things thrown at you. And fortunately, I coach football as well in Texas. And I tell any young coach now, if you get a chance to coach football, coach football. You don't have to do it long. I did it varsity football for 6 years, 2 in Texas, 4 in Chickasha, and 1 here, Smith, 7 years. And I was a head 7th grade football coach here in Tuttle for 10. And the organization I found, putting together a staff, how to operate in maybe a larger scale really helped me. Plus, where I was going with that is Ron Lynch was our head football coach, great mentor. He had a packet and it had team rules, what you're going to do on Saturday, how we're going to handle injuries. And so I was building my coaching acumen, my knowledge at that time. And of course, every year, you talk about Jerry Best. We frequently talked last night. We bounce ideas off each other. We share videos, how to coach kids. And so that's been a lifelong journey for me, really, since I got out of college, just learning more wrestling. And as it applies to leadership, more so now than ever. Technique, I study that, and it comes second nature to me. But inspiring kids, motivating kids, building trust is where I get all the good nowadays.
Oh, that's awesome, Matt. What I think is really, you offer a unique perspective there, that you're saying, hey, go coach football, because as the football coach, you can't do everything, right? You have to entrust your people. You have to have a system in place. And the same thing that's probably contributes to success as a wrestling coach, having the right people in the right position, in the right plan, and the expectations laid out for your coaches, for your parents, your kids. Football is a much bigger scale, and then you can come and scale it down to wrestling, and you're probably leaps and bounds ahead than if you just started as a wrestling coach and never branched out from there.
Yes, I mean, I'm indebted to Coach Lynch. He was AD at the time there, and he said, hey, would you be interested in coaching freshman football and, this and that? And he goes, it pays more. I said, sure. Me and my wife, well, we didn't have any kids at the time, and I jumped in. And I remember he chewed my butt a couple of times for I don't know, like different blocks. And I was like, man, I'm learning on the fly, and he'd told me before, expected me to learn it. And so I've got a lot of things in my mind when I teach kids and talk to people. And the thing I learned there that I don't do is I never assume anything. So when I'm showing kids in 7th grade football, I can go on and on. Like, I had a kid who had a tail pad, which is the old butt pad, in his knee pad one time. And I remember from day one, I taught the kids how to put on their uniforms, how to wear it right, how to tighten their chin strap. I never assumed anything, because there's a lot of kids that don't know. And I feel like I'm a teacher more so than anything. And I feel like I'm really good at teaching. And when I teach wrestling, a lot of times the kids are sometimes like, I can see this glaze on their face. And so something I learned recently from Urban Meyer, who's a collegiate coach, and that's the deal. I learned from everybody, but Urban Meyer for a long time was at Ohio State. Before then, he was at Florida. He talks about stimulating environment, and he requires his coaches, if they're in there coaching or whatever, and it's like uninspiring or kind of dead, he don't allow it. You've got to be able to stimulate the environment. So I talk about that a lot. Like, there's different ways I do it. My kids know I can get onto them hard, or we can play around, goof off, but they've been around me long enough. They read me. But being able to inspire the environment you're teaching or make it exciting is important. So from the football aspect, I learned a lot as a young coach and how to work with other coaches, and I applied it to wrestling. And not only do you build relationships, my main intent in coaching 7th grade football, because I like football, I love the team aspect of it, but it allowed me to have a hand in developing relationships with those kids that were not going to play basketball, that could come to the wrestling room and ultimately learn from this great sport. Not that we needed them. You know, a lot of people think, oh, you're just recruiting them because you need them to fill weights. That's true. But I believe so much in the platform of wrestling and what it can teach an individual, what it's taught me, not only from the hard work, the perseverance, self-confidence, but there's nothing that deters me really. I just know if I have work hard at it, that nothing's going to be harder than a hard wrestling practice or going out and competing one-on-one in the national finals. I just feel like I can withstand anything that's thrown at me, and I credit wrestling for all that.
Yeah, great. So talking about, right, you're the head coach at Tuttle. You've been there, the head coach for 14 years. Before that, you were an assistant there. I think before that, you said you were at Chickasha, right, coaching at your alma mater. Before
Yes.
that, your first job was coaching down in Carrollton. So let's talk about Tuttle for a sec. This past year, unprecedented success for your team, like unbelievable, right? 9 individual state champs, 2 runners-up, a 3rd place finish, 247 team points at the state tournament. I mean, that's unbelievable. Can you talk about what it was like to have, for one, 11 wrestlers in the state finals? And then this is probably a longer answer, but talk about the foundation that was set up years ago that you put into place that culminated into these results in 2020. You know, who are the people all of us outside of Tuttle should be aware of for their contributions to the program's success?
Awesome. Well, yes, this season was outstanding. You know, we returned a great team, and as any good wrestling fan, coach, parent knows, from when season ends in late February, early March to the following year of the starting wrestling season, you have these talks of how you're going to be next year all summer long, whether it's at 4th of July events, whether it's at freestyle events, wherever it is. Wrestling people love to talk lineup, who's going to be where. So coming into this season, we had great expectations. They were out of the roof. We were going to be preseason in the top 10. And then we had a couple injuries. Dustin Plott, who was ranked number 1 in the country at the time, decides to have surgery. Garrett Stidley hurt his shoulder right in preseason, who was a 2-time state champion. Dustin Plott was a 2-time state champion. And so we had 2 of our more veteran seasoned guys that had these great accolades that were going to not be in our lineup. So all of a sudden we're kind of like, whoa, we got this really tough schedule. We wrestle a tough schedule every year, but it was a little bit more tough this year because we were going to Chicago and wrestling some private schools, and that in itself, they don't have a weak spot in their lineup. So we battled throughout the year. We had to juggle our lineup some. What happened was we had some younger kids who got the opportunity to get in the lineup, which is going to pay dividends in the future. But when we put 11 in the state finals, that's, you know, unprecedented. We've actually done it before a couple of years ago. In 2018, we had 13 state placers. So I can go back over the course of the last 6-7 years, and each group has their own little thing they can kind of hang their hat on. We had 7 champions back in like 2017. We'd qualified all 14. This is the 3rd year we've done that since 2010, which is a big, big feat, getting all 14 guys. You know, you always set your goals, and I've always heard this, and somewhat far-fetched, and so we don't necessarily do it, but you want 14 champions, 14 placers, all that stuff. For us, it's all about just maximizing our potential. Like, we're going to try to get as many champs as we can, but at the end of the day, if we can all reach our goals or exceed our goals and reach our potential, that's what it's about. So when we look at it, and we had 11 in the finals, we lose the first one at 113, and then at 126 to 220, we had 10 in a row. And to set the stage, the track wrestling video broadcaster was Greg Henning, who was one of the wrestling coaches who I replaced, taught here for 21 years and coached wrestling. He was a broadcaster. Our band had got selected that night to do all the intro before the state tournament. So it was like so familiar. Our band was over here playing before the rest of the state finals. Greg Henny was on the microphone. And then from 126 to 220, we had 10 guys in a row in the finals. We started off with a sophomore who was state runner-up last year, and he won it. And we just went on a roll. We won like 6 or 7 in a row. And then we come back in our 82, 95, and 221. Next thing you know, we had 9 champions. And I would be lying if I said the last several years that the talk of, well, when are you going to break the record for having more than 7 champions? Because that tied Bristow, Midwest City, and El Reno for the most champions. And then this year we had 12 consecutive, which broke the record. It used to be us was tied with 11 with El Reno's great teams, and Archie Randall was there, and Perry High School, which has 42 state championships in history. So like I said, going back to those summer talks was always fun. And so guys like Joe Dolphin or Robert Plotter, you can go back to guys that are much older than that, talking about, you could have 10 champions next year. And it's like, guys, y'all don't understand. It is super hard to make that happen, And so to see it all come to fruition this year was super rewarding. And more so, we had 6 of our 9 champions were first-time champions. 6 of our 9 were first-time champions, and 3 of them were seniors. So, winning a state championship is the pinnacle for most guys. Few go to college. Few aspire to be national champions. But that high school state championship is so rewarding because of the hard work you put in. And so our guys just wrestled determined. And we didn't wrestle very good at that beat the streets deal in Chicago, and we got whipped. And I shouldered a lot of the blame. I can remember that I got choked up there. Anyway, we had some issues, and a lot of it was that I'd probably put too much expectation on some kids undoingly. Anyway, long story short, we had some meetings, we had some discussions, and next thing you know, like, it was easy. The kids were all pulling for each other. We went to Allen, Texas the next week after we got home from this cold, miserable trip in Chicago. It wasn't miserable, actually. It sounds better if I make it miserable, but no, we had a great trip in Chicago, other than we got whipped. Lake Highland Park whipped us, bad as we've been whipped in a long time. We lost to Bergen Catholic, but our high school only has 600 kids in it, 9 through 12. And we're a public school. And we're third in our state in classes. You got 6A, 5A, and then 4A. So for us to get humbled like that, it didn't bother our parents. It didn't so much bother our kids, but it bothered me. Like, we went up here and just got whipped. I mean, I remember I just couldn't handle it because it hadn't happened in a while. So we get back, we have a quick turnaround. But within those 2 days, we had a lot of discussion, and the kids got their minds right. We went down and wrestled Allen and Allen, Texas, who was really good at the time, and wrestled outstanding. It was like, wow, old Tuttle showed up. We won all the close matches. We won matches in overtime, picked up bonus, and then we beat the brakes off of Arlington Martin. They were underhanded or shorthanded. And from then on, set us on this ascension to where the kids just wrestled more inspired and determined. And I say all that in spite of not having Dustin Plott or Garrett Steidley, who were both going to be 3-time state champions that year, in our lineup. And we had 9 champions. We set the scoring record, win our 12th state title. So, man, it was just super awesome. But going back to laying the foundation for our wrestling program, I alluded to Greg Henning earlier. He was the second coach here. When they started wrestling, we're a relatively young wrestling community. In 1984 was the first year. Coach Good was a football coach for 1 year, and then they brought in Greg Henning, who actually wrestled at OU, was a state champion himself, had coached at Salisaw High School, 3-time state champion, and so forth before he came to Tuttle. So he was well on his way to laying a great foundation. He was here for 21 years, and he had 2 sons that were 4-timers. One of them was a 3-timer. He coached on the cultural exchange for USA Wrestling Oklahoma, did a lot of stuff. And so him and a guy by the name of Mike London really laid a great foundation. Mike coached our youth league for a long time, recently quit just last few years. But those guys are – Tuttle Wrestling owes a lot to those 2. But it's been a great run. And we got a great foundation now. And we're a little small high school in a great spot south of Oklahoma City, all the big schools. And we like to brag that we can hold our own. I'm not sure what the other parts of that question were. I can maybe follow up, but it's a great little place to coach wrestling for sure.
Yeah, no, my question was really long-winded, but it was kind of laying the foundation for the question, but the question, you touched on it, right? The people that we don't know that need to be recognized. And right, dating back to 1985, I think, when Greg Henning became the head coach, and super cool that, right, the kind of the individual laying the foundation at the high school level, 3-4 decades ago, is the individual who's on the microphone when your team is just rattling off individual state title after individual state title.
Yeah, and to touch on it a little bit, we do a Mike London Legacy Award, who is the guy that runs our Little League. And like last year, we recognized 4 women, mothers of wrestling, who were here in the late 80s. We've recognized Frank Nesbitt, who actually was a wrestling official who rode and went to Fargo several years, and this was all back in the early 90s. So we reward those guys. One great thing that we have going in Tuttle is we have a big alumni following that still comes in and works with our guys, either in the summer or they just stop in the room, and they may not physically put their shoes on, but they work with our guys in the sense of the mental side of it or what they see. And I think what I've done a great job of is cultivate that and let them know that they're welcome. And a lot of times they run stuff by me, and I'm like, hey, you don't need to run that stuff by me. We got a trust built up here. Have at it. Let them know where they're missing the mark. And so it's really been a wrestling family involvement over the years. And go back and like to lay the story for my career in Tuttle. I wrestled for Greg and freestyle a little bit when I was in high school, but when I first took over and I was his assistant back in 2005, I was fortunate. I coached on our football team that first year. We went 14-0, won a state title, which is super hard to do in Oklahoma, and worked with a great coaching staff there. Phil Coons was a great mentor as well. But then Greg gave me the reins, said basically, go at it, coach them. And so I had a head start really as far as a head coach because I was assistant that year, but I was running the show per se, bouncing ideas off him. And we had a great 8th grade class. I'm telling you, great 8th grade class. And so I poured a lot of focus into that group. And then in 2000, so that would have been like 2005 and 6. And we went to the Shawnee Duels, which is a big dual tournament here in Oklahoma for junior high. And we got second. Got beat by Catoosa, who was really good at the time. I think Catoosa or Edmond North or Broken Arrow, one of those, because it's always one of us, 3 or 4, that's always in the finals there. And we didn't have an 86-pounder. I'm like, guys, we're going to this tournament wrestling. At that time, we only had 13 junior high weights. I said, we only got 12 weights. We're given 6 points. We went and got a kid out of the basketball gym. He went on to be a 2-time state champion at 103 pounds. Great story. Won state his junior and senior year at 103 pounds. Started wrestling in Christmas, his 8th grade year. This year we had one. He started 7th grade, won state at 160 pounds for us. So those stories really give you credibility when you're talking to kids that, hey, it can be done, because so many people think that you have to start wrestling at the youth level to be good, and you don't. I went on and wrestled in college back when youth was still really popular, started in 7th grade and made a great career out of it. So I really like to get that out there as much as possible, that you can start in high school. When I was in Texas, we started wrestling in 9th grade. I was getting kids out of the hallway when they were 9th graders. We didn't have a junior high program in Texas. Some of them do now, but not very many. And, talking about lifelong relationships, and that's what a lot of stuff is as you get to be older in wrestling and anything. We went down and wrestled Allen on that day, and a kid named Robert Lopez showed up, who I coached in 99 and 2000. Hadn't seen him in 20 years. He's like, Coach, it was one of those deals we hugged, and we're like, Robert, you hadn't changed a bit. And he introduced me to his son, who's a 16-year-old, like 113-pounder there in McKinney. And he had made a point to bring his son to watch us wrestle, so he'd come back and say hello. So that was cool. So
that's super cool, and probably really cool for Robert as well, right? It came full circle, and he got to show his son, like, hey, that was the individual, right? Why we're in this gym is because of that man right there.
Well, and more, and I thank you for that and proud of that. But more than anything, he talked about how he made his son, or encouraged his son to wrestle, because what wrestling did for him. He's now like a federal agent of some sort, and he really credits what he went through in wrestling has given him the mindset to go on to college and succeed career-wise that he had. And he started wrestling in ninth grade, didn't know nothing. And I had him for 2 years. I was only there 2 years. But he said I made such an impact on him. He loved the sport, and his son's wrestling now, and he wants to bring his son up to Tuttle to a camp and all that stuff. And so those are the neat things. You know, when I go back and look at my career, Chad Randall at Chickasha, there's not a better technician out there. I promise you, not a better technician. And he studies it and works hard at it. But I learned so much. I learned so much throughout my career from everybody that I try to piece it all together and how it fits my perspective and my own unique coaching style. So I think that's really, really key.
Yeah, that's great. So obviously you talked a lot about this year's team at Tuttle. One of the wrestlers, your son, Luke, state champ this year. He's heading to Oklahoma State in the fall to go to college. Can you talk about the special bond between you and him, right? Both as a father and a son and as a coach and an athlete?
Yeah, it's a great bond that you develop. Coaching your kid through the sport that you love is challenging, to say the least. I knew what it did for me, and he's been around wrestling since he was little bitty. He was when he was in kindergarten. Shelly Coons, our football coach's wife, would pick him up from the elementary school, bring him over, drop him off. He'd run in, and he'd stay around there all afternoon. He'd get there like a little after 3. We'd be there till 5 o'clock. So when I say he grew up in a wrestling room, as a lot of coaches' sons do in the field house and so forth, he grew up in a wrestling room. He had a couch in there. He'd go and do his homework some, but my wife would sometimes come pick him up when she got off work, but for the most part, he stayed there. So we cultivated a relationship that when it became challenging is when he started being more competitive at wrestling. I tried to keep the brakes pumped on him wrestling too soon, just because in my opinion, you can start being too competitive too early. I wanted him to love the sport and enjoy putting in the work, which he does now. Like, he shows me more videos and more technique and knows way more wrestling jargon and all history and current information than I ever could. I mean, he loves, that's all he does when he's not playing Fortnite probably or Snapchatting his friends. He's following all these different videos and telling me what's the latest scoop with who's going where coaching wise. And he's been fortunate. Got a picture right over here. Let me grab real quick. He's been fortunate. This is John Smith that says to Matt Surber. This was when I was like in junior high, but there's a picture of him going to camp with us when he was a little bitty. Got Tom Brands' autograph. He knew all these guys when he was younger and grew up with them. And coaching the junior, the summer wrestling, the guys like Tony Cook and Johnny Cook. I mean, he learned some bad language, some choice words. He learned how to give butt chewings at an early age, and all that's been beneficial to him. But he's had the luxury of going to the University of Missouri camps, Penn State camp we went to, Allen camp down there with Coach Best and all the guys he brings in. When we went to Penn State camp, he worked out with Bo Nickel. Like, he's been afforded so much opportunities, and he really understands, and he's grateful for it. But going back to the challenges, he's more like his mother mindset-wise and not me. And so we butt heads a little bit on some issues. And I say that jokingly. I'm one of those, I'm a type A personality. I like all my stuff organized, and I like to know where it's at. And I know I'm going to get from point A to point B. He's not that way. He might not know where his wrestling shoes are or where his singlet is, stuff like that. And those have been a little bit of struggle because I'll get on to it and separating that from home and in the wrestling room. But really, there's not a better way to go about raising your son than in the wrestling room. There's probably not a better way for a kid to grow up than to be a coach's son. And so it's been fun. It's been rewarding. The college recruiting process was enjoyable. I thought it'd be stressful, but it wasn't. All those coaches I respect that recruited him, I feel like they respected me, and so we could have some open conversation. He decided he wanted to go wrestle at Oklahoma State, and now we're looking forward to the next 5 years, and then maybe beyond. We'll see.
Yeah, and Stillwater's not too far, right? Just a little bit northeast of you. So
Yeah, hour and a half, and we got to one of the most memorable moments when he won his first state title. He beat a senior, and that was pretty awesome. When he was sophomore, he got beat in overtime by another senior. Kid had moved in, who was really wrestles at OU right now. Jacob Butler, really great wrestler. Luke took on the challenge. He could have went down a weight class or up a weight class. He took on a challenge. It didn't work, or it didn't come out in his favor. But what he learned through persevering through those challenges, it was great, because you get to college, you're wrestling a good guy every week. And it's being pushed on social media, or it's being pushed on message boards. And so I think that's something the kids have to deal with nowadays that I didn't have to. So I think it was beneficial for him to go through some of those taxing moments, dealing with having to beat somebody that's older than you, or have already won a couple of state titles and things. And then most memorable was this past summer. We won the junior duels, and it came down to him having to wrestle the kid from Illinois. And that kid had beat him before in Akron back at the Fila Cadet trials. And Luke went out there and took him down, beat him 10-0. Everybody's like, whoa, what just happened? We beat Illinois. And to this day, that's probably been the most memorable wrestling moment, just because it was a team environment and it came down to him and everybody knew what was on the line. So it's been fun.
That's really cool to hear your take on, right? Not that you're biased or anything, but having a kid grow up in the sport of wrestling, having a grow up with a dad as a wrestling coach, there's obviously some value there. So I think you did a really good job of articulating that, Matt. That was cool.
Appreciate it.
So a non-wrestling question, but going to pull off your wrestling background here. So right now you're the assistant principal at Tuttle High School. And I know you've been part of a leadership team that's had two, I would say, interesting, we'll call it, scenarios to navigate. First, in 2018, I know the teachers in Oklahoma went on strike for 10 days in the spring. I think you and I were actually in Indianapolis together when it was going on at the National Federation meeting. And then now, everybody is remote learning, and it's this brand new experience in light of the pandemic. How have your experiences as a wrestler and a wrestling coach helped you lead the kids and the teachers at Tuttle High School through those two times?
Man, that's as a wrestler and as a wrestling coach, both of those have been paramount, I believe. Wrestling wise, like I've said numerous times, just taught me fight hard, don't give up, persevere, be positive, and I've got a never say die attitude. And I think successful wrestlers that have went through the grind understand that. I mean, it's as simple as when I take groceries in from outside. It's like I'm going to grab 4 or 5 bags, or it's just a wrestler mindset. There's so many ways that I could come up with analogies, that people that have wrestled understand the wrestling mindset. And so in 2018, we didn't necessarily shut down our school like a lot of did in Oklahoma. We were out on Fridays because of the way our schedule worked. After spring break, we had all these snow days built in. And so we had teachers that would go up to the state capitol on Friday or take off half days or take out of school. So we still operated as a school, but leading through that, and even now through this pandemic with the coronavirus, as a wrestling coach has probably been more of what I've leaned on. And I learned a long time ago as a coach, it's like you've got to build trust and you've got to build that buy-in amongst you and your kids, or in this instance, you and your staff. And they've got to trust that you've not only got their best interest in mind, but that you're competent enough to lead them in the right direction. And so I think through wrestling as a coach, I've dealt with a lot of things, encouraging kids when things weren't going right. You're going to have low times during your wrestling career, during your wrestling season. Things are going to come up that wrestling's humbling. You can be 10-0 and then get thrown and pinned and you think the world's coming to an end, or a state champion year before and then lose. So I think that you just got to keep a perspective on it. And what I think I do a really good job of is relating to people. I'm fairly humble, I guess, and I think I'm easy to talk to. And so leading our staff has not been any issues. We've got a great community here, and our teachers through both of those circumstances, which were somewhat adverse, have showed the resilience to understand that we'll get through it together, and things will be all right. And so I just lean on, there's days when it's tougher than others, that I lean on my wrestling background. When I'm dealing with teachers and our staff, I lean on my coaching background and guidance to them.
Great. I think you're obviously highlighting the fact that I guess I'll steal the Gable quote, that once you've wrestled, everything in life is easy. So, right, the bar's been set in terms of what hard is or what difficult is by wrestling. And as a former wrestler, you can lean back on that and say, I've been through this, right? Like what you talked about a little bit ago. You've had the Chad Randall whoop you in practice. This isn't as difficult as that, right? You've been through that kind of stuff, and you're like, okay, right, I've got this. I'm a wrestler at my core.
Yeah, and everybody always wants to equate a lot of the whippings in wrestling to the physical side of it, but the mental anguish you go through sometimes, I always tell our 7th graders when we get them in there, we start 7th grade practice, no other time in your life will you be over in the corner of the wrestling room, somebody's got you in a headlock, you're fighting for what you think is life and death, you're not able to breathe, and you're wondering when coach is going to blow the whistle. That's the physical side of it. That some people go through their whole life never experiencing some of that combative nature of this sport mindset. But then to continually go in and get whipped day after day sometimes, knowing that you're getting better, coach is patting you on your back, coach believes in you, you're going to get better. Going through that mentally, like, coach believes in me, but I'm still getting whipped. Because that happens to a lot of 7th graders. That happens to, as you go through your progression of learning and wrestling. And so it's twofold. We've had that poster in our wrestling room, that Dan Gable quote, once you've wrestled everything in life is easy, in our wrestling room for a long time. And the kids understand the meaning of it, the true meaning of it. And when they leave our program, I rest assured that for the most part, the ones that stuck with it and stuck through our program understand and will take that with them because they've heard it from me and then they've lived it, and experienced it. But
fantastic. Fantastic. So we touched on it a minute ago about the National Federation of High Schools. So for the last 4 years, you've served as the coach representative to the National Federation of High Schools Rules Committee. How does a high school coach, one from Tuttle, Oklahoma, or Powell, Wyoming, or you name it, right? How does a high school coach get selected in that position? And in your 4 years, what rule or rules have been implemented that you're most proud of or think have advanced high school wrestling the most?
Okay, yeah. So I just finished my 4th year, and there's 4 or 5 sections, or 6 sections, and then the coaches rep. And I think when it came open, we had a rep from our state who was serving Section 6, which is Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, New Mexico, the surrounding states here, coming off of that committee. And he recommended me. And so I really don't know. I got an email, and then I remember calling Mike Clark, who was our state director at the time, like, hey, what is this? I said, I've got a lot of irons in the fire. And the first week of April is right when we're getting rolling with freestyle wrestling, and we host a big tournament right around then. I said, the last thing I need to do is go to Indianapolis for 2.5 days and be away. And he said, it's rewarding. He said, you'll enjoy the process. And so I didn't debate on it too long, but once I decided to do it, it's been nothing but a rewarding process. You really have a great appreciation for how rules are written, and really the task, the sometimes arduous task of going through all the little minutia in the rule and what it's got to pass the sports medicine advisory, it's got to pass legal, how it fits regionally across this part of the country to another. And so I really try to express that when I'm talking to other coaches that are trying to beat me up because they see my picture in the national rules book. It's like, you got to know these rules and change this. I'm like, guys, there's 13 of us on the committee. I'm small. I'm just one part of the puzzle. But anyway, it has been, I've really enjoyed it. It's been great for me to grow professionally in that aspect. But when I look back at the rules, one is we've been trying to change the weights. That's going to happen this year. And that's I think that may help in participation in wrestling. I really don't know. There's some mixed feeling in the state. So I'm really not, that one doesn't set well with me as far as what I'm proud of. What I'm really proud of is the actual sport of wrestling has been a whole lot more inclusive of women since I've been there the last 4 years. We've seen that with Joan Folk and Andrea Yamato, who helped lead that charge. They've been to that committee and spoke. And I talked to them. We've made some rule changes that have helped female wrestling this year, and I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, but we made some changes with weigh-in. So men or females and males are going to be able to weigh in together. They'll have to look the same, wear a singlet. And these haven't been approved, none of that. So I probably shouldn't say anything, but I'll say it's some weigh-in changes for men and women, as well as hair. We've continued to allow variations of hair length, and we're going to see that more going into the future, which from an image standpoint is advantageous for females, I think. They don't want to wear these big hair nets, hair coverings. Wrestling on the boundary has been a big one the last several years. We can get pins on the boundary or even outside of the boundary, and we can score points as it relates to reversals and escapes on the boundary. All those allow wrestling to continue and score more points. In my opinion, fans like to see more action. They like to see more points. They don't like to see defensive wrestling. And so those things have been good. Also, trying to take away some of the subjectivity in stalling, which is tough. I must say that the NFHS and the NCAA, those are two different organizations, and they're mutually exclusive. We don't do what NCAA does, and they don't do what we do. We have our own set of high school rules. And so explain that to high school coaches sometimes is tough, because they're like, well, we just need to make it like college, wrestle outside of the boundary. And there's a lot more things that keep you handcuffed in doing those. But I think my 4 years on the committee, I have been vocal in a sense that I spoke up for coaches, but I also spoke up for what I felt was best interest of wrestling, based on not my opinion, but getting a collective consensus from people I've talked to. And so proud to have been on there for 4 years and enjoyed my time.
Yeah, great. What I would say is great job highlighting the wrestling's action, high school wrestling in particular, action to become more inclusive, right? The obviously as we expand wrestling to the other 50% of the population that historically has been left out, right? We're obviously going to get better as a sport. So
yes, no
great.
doubt.
All right, Matt, last question for you. I know, right, in Oklahoma, if anybody has Netflix, or if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram, anything like that, you'll know why I'm asking this question. But can you confirm that you have never been to Wynnewood, Oklahoma?
Oh man, I knew something was coming up. I had a background when I was, and you're on that committee. I had a background here, and it had Tiger King up there. But no, it's funny. I have never been to Joe Exotic's big zoo over there, and I almost feel bad now. It's like we need to make a family trip. But Oklahoma's a great state. We're a great wrestling state. Please don't judge us by some of the stuff that you might see from Joe Exotic. But yeah, that's hilarious. That's funny. So
no, I told you when we were on the National Federation call, I reached out to another old Oklahoma high school coach, Kevin Crutchmer, and asked him the same thing. I'm like, have you ever been to Wynnewood? It's like, man, I've never heard of that place until Tiger King came out. Yeah, so obviously a lot of people in Oklahoma are taking the same approach. Don't judge us. Don't judge us. So that's awesome.
He even he politically, he tried to run for president, tried to get on the ballot back in 2016. You can look him up on YouTube or Google him and see some of his ads. But yeah, it's I guess when we get quarantined and got a lot of stuff that just hit perfect. Like I think it was released like March 20th or somewhere right in there. Everybody's at home. Is like, hey, what's this about? So kind of caught fire, and it's funny that it's just right down the road here. So Tuttle actually has Tiger Safari. I don't know if you ever remember here a few years ago we had Tigernado, which there was a tornado right around here close several years ago, and quickly the local news was like, it was close to Tuttle, Oklahoma, and some tigers at Tiger Safari are loose. And so on social media, you had this Tigernado. You have to look that up. So that's another funny, unique story that's happened here recently.
Yeah, and one of the things that I thought was, what's your high school mascot in Tuttle?
We're the Tigers, baby. So go Tigers.
So I guess in some way, what we can say, Matt, is that you're the Tuttle Tiger King.
I don't know if I'll take that reference or not, but if it sticks, whatever.
Gotcha. Well, so obviously wanted to end it on a humorous note. I certainly thank you for jumping on to be featured in this Moments Off the Mat segment with Matt Surber. Again, Matt, certainly appreciate your time and all your insight. On a personal level, my brother's a high school coach in Wisconsin. I know I'm certainly going to make sure that he tunes in. Let me rephrase that. I'm going to send him the link after this post and say, hey, you know, you've got 3 boys, you're a high school coach. There's things that you need to pull from here. So I know that, right, there's a ton of coaches nationwide that are going to be able to listen to what you've had to say today and get better as a coach. And that will impact wrestling positively. So again, I'm super appreciative. Thanks for jumping on. Anything else that you want to say before we sign off here?
No, I mean, I love coach. I love talking coaching wrestling, and you know, I've started doing a lot more as I've got a little bit older, and I guess it's kind of coincided with our success. So, any coach out there, I feel free to share anything I know, and I like to learn from whoever. So, appreciate you having me on, Tony, and hopefully get together again sometime.
All right, thanks. Well, you have a great day.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it. Go Tuttle Tigers.